Welcome to another MedTech Gurus podcast, where we meet and discuss trending and educational topics that are important to today's medical technology sales and marketing professionals. Now, it doesn't matter if you're new to the space or if you're a seasoned medical sales and marketing professional. You all have come to the right place. You see, the medical technology world is ever changing, and MedTech Gurus will help you stay up to date by interviewing experts and opinion leaders. Now, we call them gurus, and they will bring you information, techniques, and strategies that are sure to help you enhance your knowledge and help you bring value to your customers and your company. Now, I'm Sylvester Harris, and I'm pleased to introduce your host for MedTech Gurus, Mr. Tom Hickey.
Hey, what's going on out there, gurus? This is Tom Hickey, your host of MedTech Gurus, and welcome to episode number 258. Gurus, you're in for a real treat in this episode. We're honored to have Dr. John Santini, President and CEO of Vergent Biosciences, with us. Dr. Santini is recognized as one of Popular Science's Brilliant 10, and he shares his journey in driving innovation at Vergent Biosciences. You'll enjoy John's insights as he delves into the best practices that fuel breakthrough developments and the challenges of securing investor funding. He discusses the hurdles of bringing groundbreaking technologies to the market. This is an episode packed with inspiration and practical advice for anyone in the medtech industry. Get ready to learn from one of the brightest minds in the medtech arena. But before we get into the episode, let's thank our sponsor, Accelerant Consulting. Gurus, GPOs, RPCs, IDNs, it's all so overwhelming. You need to accelerate sales and sweeten that bottom line, and you need to do it now. But you're not even sure where to start. Let the experts at Accelerant Consulting guide you through today's complex healthcare market. Check them out at accelerantconsulting.com. That's EXCELERANT consulting.com, and do it today. Okay, gurus, here it comes, episode number 258. And remember, if you like what you hear, please subscribe, leave a review, and most importantly, tell a friend. Welcome, MedTech Gurus. Today, as I mentioned in the introduction, we have a terrific guest with us, John Santini, PhD, President and Chief Executive Officer of Vergent Bioscience. Dr. Santini is a life science executive, serial entrepreneur, inventor, and scientist who is focused on the creation and growth of business developing next-generation pharmaceuticals, drug delivery systems, biosensors, and surgical oncology products for more than 20 years. He currently serves as the President and CEO of Vergent Bioscience. During his career, Dr. Santini has negotiated and executed collaborations and licensing agreements with major pharmaceutical and medical device companies and has raised over $100 million in venture capital and corporate funding for his companies. Dr. Santini was the first industry scientist to be honored as one of the Popular Science magazine's Brilliant 10, and he was named one of the top 100 young innovators in the world by Technology Review magazine. He has published work in top scientific journals such as Nature, Nature Biotechnology, and Science Translational Medicine, and has over 80 issued U.S. and international patents. His work has garnered a Technology Pioneering Award from the World Economic Forum and a gold medal from Edison Awards in the Science and Medical Game Changers category. Dr. Santini earned his PhD in chemical engineering from MIT in the laboratories of Professor Robert Langer and Michael Sima as National Science Foundation Fellow, and has a bachelor's degree in chemical engineering from the University of Michigan. Hey, John, are you ready to be our guru today?
I am. Thanks for having me, Tom.
We're real excited to have you. So tell us a little something about yourself or your family so we can get to know you a little better.
Sure. You know, I was born and raised in Michigan. I continue to be a hopelessly loyal Detroit Lions football team fan, as well as my fan of my alma mater, University of Michigan Wolverines. I've always enjoyed science, but at the age of 12, I was diagnosed with lupus, and that piqued my interest in medicine. And from there, I attended the University of Michigan and then MIT and been focusing on startups. I'm blessed to have a loving wife and 4 children. They've been incredibly supportive over the years as I've been pursuing these startups. My wife in particular has been an incredible source of support as In the startup world, you're constantly having ups and downs and uncertainty. And she's really supported me and her family through all of these entrepreneurial ventures. In addition, we met at MIT. I was studying chemical engineering. She was working on her PhD in material science. And over the years, she's helped a lot in contributing to solving important technical problems at my various companies. And in fact, one of her solutions even resulted in an issued US patent. So I've been very lucky to have that kind of support around me. We made our way back to the Midwest about 13 years ago and planted our family in Minnesota. And after a couple of years of consulting, a friend of mine introduced me to Vergent. It was an area, molecular imaging was a space that I really didn't have a lot of experience in, but the science looked fascinating. And so I wanted to dig in. And after a little bit of time in there, we looked at what we had available to us. We found a wonderful molecule developed by Dr. Matt Bojo at Stanford. And we felt that it could really address some unmet needs in human surgical oncology. And Vergent Bioscience in its current form was born that day.
Yeah, that's exciting. But I've got to bring you back to the Michigan roots piece because I'm currently a Michigan resident. And for those of you that are watching us on video, I happen to be wearing my Honolulu blue shirt today, which is the colors of the Detroit Lions, only by happenstance, but long time myself, and maybe we're hoping we'll get there here soon. But
someday.
That's right. So, John, as we mentioned in the introduction, I was intrigued by your being named to the popular science magazine Brilliant 10, which I think is an amazing honor. At a high level, tell us how that came about and a little bit about that backstory there.
Sure. Every year, Popular Science chooses 10 scientists and engineers, usually fairly early in their career. And they say these are people that they think could possibly be change makers in their fields. At that time, when this came around, I had been developing drug delivery systems for just about 14 years, 5 years in academia and just under 10 at my first startup company. And was trying there to develop a implantable drug delivery chip. So literally a silicon chip that contained reservoirs with many drug doses on it, and that this chip could be either pre-programmed to deliver drug at precise times or wirelessly controlled to give drug in response to some sort of event. And the press at that time had dubbed this the pharmacy on a chip. And so to achieve this, we had to build a pretty interesting team of scientists and engineers, a very diverse team. Because as you'd imagine, we're dealing with silicon chips. So we had chip designers, we had software engineers, biologists, chemists, drug developers. And we'd had some success in building some of our early prototypes, had some, I think, good fortune of being able to publish our work in good journals like Nature and Nature Biotech. And so I felt quite honored when they said that they were selecting me for this. And as you mentioned in the intro, I come to find out later that, it was the first industry person selected this. They almost always choose people from academia. And what I found most striking about this was that it helped confirm for me that I could still do real cutting edge science, but do it in industry. I didn't have to be in academia to do that. And in fact, over the years, it's really been my experience that when you're dealing with a complex technology, something involves integrating a lot of different fields or a lot of different technologies. I think industry actually can possibly be even the better place to advance that kind of work. And so was very, very happy to be honored that way. Very humbled.
Yeah, that had to be something. Was that like a surprise out of the blue when that happened?
Yeah, I didn't know that. I didn't know that was coming.
Yeah, that must have been a great communication to get, right? Yeah. So,
absolutely.
So, John, many of our gurus out there are entrepreneurs or soon-to-be entrepreneurs, and you've had some success raising venture funding in your career. And I'm wondering if you can help us out with any best practices you might have developed around raising money that might be helpful to our audience out there. Do you have any thoughts for us there?
Yeah, no, thank you. Over the last 25 years or so, all of my efforts have been in startup companies. So fundraising is a key part of that. It may sound obvious to everyone, but the critical factor is being able to have identified a problem that is begging to be solved. And then the other piece is being able to tell that story in a compelling way, because investors, they don't just want to know what the technology is. They want to understand what is the value you're creating, and why should they support you as the entrepreneur in that vision? And the story can't be, I've got this great technology. It's wonderful science. Look how great and sexy this is. And I'm going to figure out how exactly to use it later. You can't do that. It's much more appropriate if you say, look, I've determined that there's this issue out there that really is causing problems for doctors or surgeons to do their job in the way that they want to do. And I think that I've got an approach to be able to do that. And oh, by the way, this approach is better than what's currently out there. And if you support me, you'll be rewarded for that investment. So for us at Vergent, the thing that really hooked me was this realization that we could try to address a really important need in cancer surgery. And that's really, how do we help surgeons be more confident that they're giving their patients the best care, that when they go in and try to take this tumor out, they're sure that they've got it all. And this is especially important when you're talking about minimally invasive surgery, where you're trying to do a very complicated procedure through a few small holes, or in the case of robotic surgery, not only working through a few small holes, but maybe sitting 10 feet away from the patient with your head in a console. And so we've tried to address this with an imaging agent, which we call VGT309, and it's targeted to tumors. And so, if you had to sum it up in one line, we light up tumors. And the goal is we light them up so that the surgeon can more easily find them and take them out. And we're starting with lung cancer, and we hope that over time to move that into other cancers, particularly colorectal and breast and prostate. And what I found when you think about fundraising that is the story resonates because it's a simple concept. And I think sometimes the simpler the concept, the easier it is to get people's attention. And fundraising is much more an art than it is a science. And there's so many different things that factor into that. And that technology really is a core piece of it. It's a core asset. But in my experience, it's really just as much about the team, the people, not just the entrepreneur, but the people around them that make the difference. Because when investors are investing, there's always risk that a technology will or will not make it. But one thing you can be 100% sure of, you're going to run into a lot of problems, and there are going to be major ups and downs, and they have to have confidence that the team has the experience and is able to take those challenges and find ways to either get over them or around them and get things back on track. And so that's critically important. And then going back to that other thing about value proposition, it's how do you tell that story so that you're not only saying this is the technology and how we're going to solve it, but this is how you're going to be rewarded for the risk that you're going to take on me and on what we're doing. And I'll just have one last comment, which is, and I found this through my own experience, especially early in my career, which was another place where people stumble is really trying to, or feeling like they have to answer everything, that they've got an answer for everything. And what I found is that honesty is actually the best course. And being able to say that you don't know the answer to something, I think demonstrates a high degree of both maturity and humility. And that I found tends to increase trust and build trust. And so if you don't know the answer to the question, say so, but then go on to describe, I don't know how to do this, but this is how I'm going to try to address this. And in fact, one of my board members very early on directed me to a famous quote by Mark Twain, and I've never forgotten it. Good judgment comes from experience, and experience comes from bad judgment. And so when you really think about that, it's about, you need to learn from your mistakes. And if you're honest and humble about what you do and don't know, that trust will get you a long way, not just with investors, but ultimately with your team members, the people who trust you, who are working with you and around you, and ultimately the customers who are going to rely on your product or your technology.
Yeah, I love that Mark Twain quote. I actually wrote that down. But, going back to telling the story in a compelling way, and I love how you laid it out, because not having that answer to everything kind of fits into that compelling story, right? And I think if I'm heading down the right path here, telling that story in that way, I think will signal to those investors that perhaps you're at the beginning of the journey or on your way, but there's still a lot of work to be done. And you're laying it out in such a way that I think establishes that trust. Am I heading down the right path with that?
Absolutely. Everyone knows that you don't have a crystal ball. You can't foresee all the issues. And the fact that you're doing something new and on the cutting edge inherently means that you're paving new ground. If you seem to have an answer for every question that some really smart people are constantly throwing at you, I think people get suspicious of that and they wonder, hey, how is this really possible? And so I think if you really let your guard down and be human and express what it is that you know and don't know, I think it's a great way to start off a relationship. And you really need to have a relationship because much like any other relationship in life, you're going to run into some really tough times and you're going to have to rely on each other. And if you're not trusting each other, if you're not relying on each other, I don't see how you're going to get through successfully.
Yeah, exactly. And you touched on something there, speaking of teams, right? And looking and doing my research about your career and some of the organizations that you've built, you've really developed some amazingly innovative teams out there. So from your perspective, how does a company develop this culture of innovation, find these people, and perhaps more importantly, then sustain it? Do you have any thoughts for us there?
Yeah, and I do. And, unfortunately, I think some of these lessons, like a lot of things I've learned through experience and at times painfully, companies really do. And it's a little bit cliche, but companies do have a personality or a culture and how the individuals, the team members fit into that culture, I just has such an incredible bearing on how that company functions. And so, look, we all want the smartest people with the deepest experience and the great resume. But over the years, I've determined that some of the best people that I've ever worked with didn't have the flashiest credentials. They had stories that sometimes had twists and turns and diversions and other things. But if you dig real deep and you find these people who work hard, more importantly, they've got some social intelligence. They care about the people around them. They understand that their success is reliant upon the success of the people around them, and they believe in the company's mission. That's a lot more important to me than just pure raw talent. And the mission at Vergent is really important. We believe we have an opportunity to help people that are struggling with cancer. And the fact that we've been able to see some of that benefit, even in clinical trials, is incredibly motivating to all of us. And I'll relate just a brief story. At a board meeting maybe a year ago, one of our board members who had been involved with the company for years just kind of stopped the meeting. He put up his hand after we had talked about some of the data and some of the things we've been doing. He said, look, I want people around the table here just to take a moment and kind of soak in what we're doing here. And I want everybody here to understand that the work, the effort, the money you put in, the sweat, the time, it's helping people. And we see that ready today. And I think everybody here just needs to take that in for a minute and remember that as we're moving forward. And I thought that was an incredibly powerful moment for everybody in the room. I think the other thing about working in oncology is that it's quite personal for everybody. I mean, there's probably not a person around who hasn't been touched in some way, a family member, a friend, a coworker that's been touched in some way by the disease. And you always feel so helpless. And I think working in the space just gives you a little bit of sense that maybe you can take a little bit of control back and you're doing something. And I think that's important. And I think if you get that right team together, and you're going to make mistakes, you're going to get people in now and then that don't fit really well. But if you get that good team together, it's a little bit like a snowball rolling downhill. It's self-sustaining. And that to me is one of the most exciting parts about working in startups and being an entrepreneur is when you have that right team together, it's just like when you hear a bunch of instruments come together and they're all in harmony and it just feels amazing. And it's a great place to be. It's a great feeling. And it's a wonderful, way to work. And so I think the other thing that I would say is that, and this is kind of deliberate over time, right? There's different models or thoughts on how you build a team. Do you build it fast and complete, or do you do it in pieces and in a measured way? And how do you balance workload versus the number of people that you bring in. One of the things that we were very deliberate about here at Vergent is wanting to operate on what we call a capital efficient model, which means we have lots of work in a lot of different areas, but we don't immediately go out and hire full-time team members for every single area that we're working. We go through and we make judgment calls about where is it important to have somebody here living and breathing this full-time versus where can we use people who have incredibly deep experience that maybe we wouldn't normally have access to or we couldn't afford. And how do we mix employees and consultants to get as far as we can and with as little cash as we can. And I think we've done that pretty well at Vergent to this point. And my investors love it. I can tell you my competitors hate it because I think they're burning a lot more cash than we are and not moving, certainly not moving any faster. So that's been an important thing is trying to strike that balance on capital efficiency and yet having a team that's complete and functioning.
Yeah, I like that capital efficient model in that orchestra, right, or the band, right? That I was thinking of that because, by bringing in that consultant, it's like bringing in that maestro once in a while, right? The band member that's there that, sometimes somebody's not having a great day, but that other person can pick you up and kind of continue on, right? So it's a really intriguing fit in what you're developing there.
No, thank you.
Yeah, so we're hearing now too that pathways to commercialization are getting more complex. We've had several gurus on talking about that. And certainly these pathways are getting more time consuming as well. So I'm just wondering with your insights into this issue and with technologies like you're developing at Vergent Biosystems, have you developed any best practices to speed this up at all?
I think our approach is twofold and I don't want to sound like a broken record, but team is really a big part of it. As you're heading toward commercialization, you start bringing on, again, all kinds of additional challenges and unforeseen issues. And so just having the right team together to be able to triage those issues and be able to anticipate what's coming down the road is probably one of the best ways to make sure that you're not running into roadblocks that are lengthening that time to commercialization and making sure you've got people together that can readjust. So team is a big part of it. I think the other thing is products always need to fit in with whatever the standard of care is at the time. And so you think about, in our case, when we're talking about surgery, we're thinking about clinical workflows. Are we causing, let's say, the surgeon or the other people around them to have to change what they're doing in order to use a product? What I think is really important is constantly reassessing those workflows as you go along and adjust because the world doesn't just stop. What you're developing, which you started developing 5 years ago in that environment changes over those 5 years. So how are you adjusting? And so we spent a bunch of time on the front end saying, what are the things that we think are going to be really important, let's say, to adoption? And how do we fit into that workflow and make sure that we're going to be relevant by the time we get to market? One of those, for example, was just how we deliver our imaging agent. And we deliver that the day before surgery during the routine preoperative assessment that's typically done for these major surgeries. And so just being able to anticipate that and know that we're fitting nicely into sort of an existing workflow, I think has done well for us thus far. And the other thing is, and it goes back to the way that the molecule was designed by our colleague, Dr. Bojo, and why it was attractive to us was by the design of the molecule wanting to make sure that we were compatible with all of the imaging equipment that's in the OR today. Because we knew when we set out that we wanted to develop an agent that could be used by surgeons for any type of cancer with any type of camera. We didn't want to have to build a camera system or develop custom software or have to go through lengthy trainings to get people to sort of fit it in. We wanted to be able to plug right in. And so I think that's that second piece that I would say we continuously are trying to look at that workflow, say, is this continue to be relevant? Are there tweaks we need to make prior to commercialization to make sure that we're still relevant? And I'll say so far, so good.
Yeah, that's intriguing. And I'm wondering with those potentially extra steps, right? That do you find that takes a little extra communication with your investors and board members? Because it sounds to me like you might invest a little heavily up front with the result of trying to get to commercialization on the tail end quicker. Am I on the right path with that?
Yeah, and it's a really interesting point you bring up, right? It's a constant balance because there's always a desire early on in the company's life cycle to minimize the amount of capital that you're raising at, let's say, at lower valuations. But the counterbalance there is you want to be able to start addressing some of the longer term things that you know are going to be important to commercialization that might be most relevant 3 or 4 years down the road. And so how do you balance raising the capital today to advance something that's going to be very relevant 3 or 4 years down the road? And there's no hard and fast rule here. It's really judgment. And at times you're going to make the right judgment and at times you won't. I think we're very pleased in retrospect. You can't tell prospectively, but in retrospect, we're pleased that we front loaded some of that work that we did around really thinking through how we fit within the surgical workflow early so that we weren't trying to run around and make major changes to the product or having to tell a really convoluted story to get people to understand it now. But sometimes you're right, sometimes you're wrong. And I'll just say that thus far, we've been pleased that the couple of bets that we made so far have played out well.
Yeah, that's outstanding. And thanks for that. And then turning to Vergent now, if I've got this right, you've developed some really interesting technologies that enhance the visualization of tumors in the minimally invasive surgical environment. I have to tell you that I've stood in on a couple of hundred of MIS robotic surgeries, and I can personally attest to the video with these devices is really pretty good. But there's always that question of, did we get everything right? And I find that the surgical team is taking some extra time and they're looking and they're being as diligent as they can be. But that's obviously adding time to the procedure and the patient under anesthesia, et cetera. So tell us a little bit about the innovation that your team is bringing to help with this. Can you bring some clarity?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Vergent really was born out of a process that was already existing at the time when we sort of built the company. Over the last 15 to 20 years, there's really been a pretty remarkable shift from open surgical procedures to these minimally invasive procedures. And overall, it's been a net positive, in particular for the patient. You're reducing some of the serious surgical complications. You're decreasing post-surgical pain. In a lot of cases, you're shortening those hospital stays or those recovery times. But it's not all good. I mean, there is a cost to everything. And I think surgeons now, when they move to a minimally invasive context, they're working within a much more constrained area. So you don't have as much room to work. Lighting is poor. You don't get all the nice angles for viewing. So you're more constrained in your visual angles. And I think most importantly is you've taken the hands of the surgeon, their most important tool, out of the patient. And so their ability to feel is either removed entirely or at least greatly limited. And so I think that's kind of where we were born out of. This agent VGT309 is developed to be able to address this. What we want to do is improve tumor visualization during the surgical procedure. And so by lighting up the tumors, we want to let the surgeon be able to make better informed decisions right then and there when they're in the patient. And therefore possibly even revise their surgical plan as they go based on what they see. And so we're working in lung cancer first. And so I'll just relate sort of how we think about the particular challenges for thoracic surgery. We kind of group them into 3 areas. And so the first is localizing or finding tumors. And so that the surgeon knew were there by preoperative imaging like CT or PET scan. So they know there's a tumor there. But it's one thing to know where a tumor is in inflated lung in a nice pre-surgical scan versus finding that same small tumor when the patient's on their side, you're looking through a deflated, shriveled lung, you've got scar tissue everywhere and blood everywhere. And so the challenge then is translating what you saw in those preoperative scans into what the surgeon actually sees there. And so if we can help them localize those tumors that they knew were there, that's a really important benefit. The second is finding tumors you didn't even know were there. And so it happens numerous times where they go in looking for this one tumor and they go in and they find, oh, there's something over here that looks really strange. Oh, there's another tumor here. But in many of these cases, they're small or they're in an odd location. They're not easily found. And so if we can help find those tumors that didn't even know were there, that would be another important area. And then the one you pointed out about margins. So you make your cut, you make your resection. Did you really get it all? And did you cut too close or did you cut through the tumor? So can we enable the ability to take that tissue and look at it and assess, yes, my margin is clean, or I've got sufficient margins, I'm happy, I can close up the patient, or I'm not happy, I'm too close, and now I'm going to take more tissue while I'm here with the patient open. And we call all three of these events, we call them clinically significant events. And we use that as our primary efficacy endpoint in our trials. We're looking at what is the proportion of patients that experience one or more of these clinically significant events during their procedure. Now, we recently published the results of our first U.S. phase 2 study that was done at the University of Pennsylvania. It was in the Annals of Thoracic Surgery. And in those 40 patients, we had a CSE rate of 40%. And to put that into context, what that means is in 4 out of every 10 patients, VGT309 provided information to the surgeon during that procedure that was actionable, that they could then do something with and make decisions and cut out less tumor or feel more confident about their margins. And that's quite remarkable. But I think it's important to just maybe relate to, I can't show a video, but I'll just try to relate in words how one of these procedures, sort of how this goes in one particular case. So in one of our thoracic surgery cases a few months ago, there was a patient that was getting a robotic resection done. So they're using a robot. And by preoperative imaging, they knew there were 2 tumors. There was a larger tumor in the right upper lobe. Surgeon didn't believe he'd have any problem finding that one. But he used our agent because he was concerned about the other one, which was in the right middle lobe. It was very small, only a few millimeters in diameter. And more importantly, it wasn't even a fully solid tumor. It was a semi-solid tumor under the surface. Thoracic surgeons call these GGOs, or ground glass opacities, because you see them as this sort of fuzzy mark on a CT scan. And so he was concerned about whether he could find it. And the standard of care today is if you go in looking for a GGO and you can't find it, you have 2 choices. You either cut out a whole bunch of extra tissue in the hopes that you've taken enough out that it's somewhere buried in there, or you leave it there and you come back, you follow it over the next 1 or 2 years and you wait till it gets big enough so you're sure you can find it. And neither of those are good options for a patient. And so in this particular patient, he found the one in the right upper lobe, took it out, no problem. And for the one in the right middle lobe, he couldn't find it. He looked all over. So using all the methods he could available to him, couldn't find it. So then he turned on the near-infrared camera. And sure enough, the VGT309 just lit this up really beautifully. You could see this 3 or 4 millimeter diameter tumor. And so he was able to grab it and just cut around it, made sure he had nice margins, but he minimized how much healthy tissue he was taking out. So those are the ones I mentioned earlier that just sort of really motivate us because, in that case, we've benefited that patient. We've saved them both the anxiety of going away from a procedure like that, saying, I still have cancer in me, and also just saving them another procedure a year or 2 down the road to take that second tumor out. So that's the kind of stuff that we do in these trials, and then ultimately our product, we believe will do when it's out there used in the field.
Yeah, that's a remarkable story, and thanks for that. I'm thinking, to your point about saving that particular patient or patients like that, that additional surgery, which leads to all other kinds of other potential complications, but that anxiety of, hearing, hey, we think we saw something in there, but we're not sure, and now we got to follow you for a couple of years. Yeah. And talk about kind of having that little, bogey following you around for the next period of time. That's got to be scary, but at the same time, a story like this has got to be very rewarding for your team.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you mentioned the phase 2 study, and if I have this right in my research, I think you're getting ready or anticipating a phase 3 study, perhaps. So tell us a little bit about this pathway, and will that lead to any other partnerships or commercialization strategies for your team?
Sure. So VGT309 is an imaging agent, which means it's a drug. FDA regulates it as a drug. However, unlike a therapeutic drug, where the trial sizes tend to be very large, hundreds or even thousands of patients, and they may span years of follow-up, the efficacy endpoints for imaging agents like this, intraoperative imaging agents, tend to be much more reasonable because you're assessing whether or not the product gave its benefit right there and then, either in the surgical procedure or shortly thereafter. And so it's a much more manageable pathway. After we complete our phase 3 study, we'll start that sometime mid next year. And after we complete that study, then we'll go and we'll submit our new drug application or NDA to FDA, and we'll get approval for application use in lung, and then move forward with commercial launch of VGT309 for lung cancer surgery. When it comes to partnerships, we're always sort of looking at that and sort of evaluating the trade-offs, because it's always a trade-off of what's the value that we gain by partnering with someone today versus what kind of long-term upside potential are we giving away in response for that. And it's a constant debate. And I'll say we'll continue to look at partnerships along the way, but they really have to be ones where for us to consider them is, either are these partnerships helping us enhance the adoption of the product in some way, or is that partnership giving us access, let's say, to a different market that we wouldn't have normally had access to on our own? Right. So our focus, our plan is to drive this through approval and commercial launch and be opportunistic as potential partnership or other opportunities come our way.
Yeah, that makes total sense. So John, I have to tell you, this seems like a really extremely exciting time for you and your team at Vergent. What does the future hold, and where are you going from here?
Yeah, it is. No, we're thrilled. We love what we're doing. Our near-term focus is really hitting the lung cancer application out of the park. And so what does that mean? It means, we're going to finish our current phase 2B study in the next several weeks. We'll close out a Series C fundraising. That Series C fundraising will drive us all the way through not just approval for lung, but through commercial launch and initial commercial sale. And then after that, probably starting later next year, we'll start doing trials in our next indication. And in this case, our focus is going to be on colorectal cancer. And then over time, in the subsequent years, we'll focus on breast cancer, prostate cancer, ovarian cancer, and others.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So, John, first of all, I'd like to acknowledge you for the time and research, the preparation to be our guru today. If somebody wants to get more information about the company or you, how do we do that? Is there a website we can go to? Are you in LinkedIn? What's the best way to learn more?
Sure. Yeah, I've got a personal LinkedIn profile. It's a good way to reach me if somebody wants to reach out directly. You can follow our progress for Vergent's progress on our company website, which is www.vergentbio.com. We do also have a company LinkedIn page where we'll post press and other links and things that are important to us, and you can follow our progress there. And we do also have a company account on X as well. So any of those are just fine.
Oh, that's fantastic. So John, once again, thank you so much. We really appreciate your time and insights today and being our guru.
Tom, thank you so much. It's really been a pleasure speaking with you today.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to MedTech Gurus. I am Sylvester Harris, your MC. If you want to learn more about Tom and his consulting services, you can go to www.pctmedical.com or email Tom at tom@pctmedical.com. Now, I can be reached at Sylvester Harris, that's SylvesterHarris 5048@gmail.com, and I'd be pleased to discuss any voiceover work that you may want for your company or broadcast. Hey, thanks so much for listening, and catch us on the next episode of MedTech Gurus.